The autumn rains of 1914 transform the Belgian fields around Ypres into a sucking quagmire of mud and misery. French artillery crews wrestle their 75mm guns into position, loading experimental shells marked with 3 white bands, tear gas canisters designed to drive German troops from their trenches without killing them. The shells burst with muffled pops, releasing wisps of ethyl bromoacetate that sting the eyes and burn nostrils. German soldiers cough, curse, and tie wet handkerchiefs over their faces, but they hold their positions. The gas dissipates within minutes, leaving only the acrid smell of failure hanging over no man's land. In Berlin, Fritz Haber pores over the French reports, his fingers tracing chemical formulas across his laboratory notebook. The Kaiser's chemist sees what the generals miss. Industrial chlorine, produced by the ton in German factories, could transform from bleaching agent to battlefield weapon. His pen scratches calculations: wind speed, gas density, lethal concentration. Fritz Haber's vision materialized on the Ypres salient as German pioneers hauled 5,730 steel cylinders to the front lines under darkness. Each canister weighed 90 pounds, filled with liquid chlorine from BASF Chemical Works. Soldiers dug them into the parapet, angled valves pointing toward French colonial troops holding the line 400 yards away. At 5 p.m, a favourable wind stirred. German soldiers twisted the valves open. A hissing filled the air as 168 tons of chlorine vaporized into a wall of greenish-yellow fog 6 feet high, creeping at walking pace across no man's land. French sentries watched the strange cloud approach, some thinking it concealed an infantry advance. The fog engulfed the Algerian trenches first. Men dropped their rifles, clutching their throats. Officers shouted orders that dissolved into choking screams. Within minutes, a 4-mile gap tore open in the Allied line as colonial troops fled, leaving behind writhing bodies turning blue in the contaminated trenches. The age of chemical warfare had begun. The greenish-yellow fog rolled forward, heavier than air, pouring into the French trenches like water flooding a canyon. Private Marcel Dubois watched the cloud approach, mistaking it for smoke until the first whiff hit his nostrils. Sharp, metallic, wrong. His throat constricted. The man beside him dropped his rifle, hands flying to his neck, eyes bulging as chlorine molecules began dissolving the moisture in his lungs. Within seconds, the trench transformed into a writhing mass of choking men. Soldiers vomited greenish froth, their faces turning from pink to purple to blue as oxygen failed to reach their blood. They tore at their collars, ripped open their tunics, desperate for air that wouldn't come. The gas clung to the earth, filling every dugout, every shell hole, turning safe havens into death traps. Those who could still move scrambled over the parapet, abandoning positions they'd held for months. Behind them, hundreds lay convulsing in the mud, drowning in their own fluids. The German infantry, watching through field glasses, saw entire battalions dissolve into panic. 4 miles of French and Algerian lines simply vanishing, leaving a gaping hole in the Allied defences at Ypres. The greenish-yellow cloud dissipates over the abandoned French trenches, leaving behind contorted bodies and the acrid stench of chlorine. Survivors stagger back to the reserve lines, their uniforms soaked with vomit, eyes streaming tears. Word spreads through the Allied positions like wildfire. The Germans possess a weapon that kills without bullets, that seeps through sandbags and drowns men where they stand. Within hours, desperate soldiers tear strips from their uniforms, urinating on the cloth before pressing it against their faces. The ammonia in urine, they reason, might neutralize the chlorine. Others dunk their handkerchiefs in muddy trench water or stuff cotton waste into their nostrils. British officers distribute bottles of sodium thiosulfate solution, instructing men to soak their mouth rags whenever they hear the gas alarm bells clang. These makeshift filters prove pathetically inadequate. The urine-soaked fabric dries within minutes, becoming useless. Men suffocate behind their own crude masks, the wet cloth restricting their breathing almost as much as the gas itself. In London and Paris, chemists work through the night, testing activated charcoal and lime soda granules, while field commanders cable increasingly frantic requests for proper respirators. The Allied respirators, still damp with urine and sweat from April's chlorine attacks, offered meagre comfort through the summer of 1915. But in the German chemical laboratories, Dr. Victor Meyer perfected a new compound, carbonyl dichloride. The French called it phosgene, from the Greek words for light and birth, because sunlight triggered its formation. On December the 19th, near Ypres, German artillery shells burst with barely a whisper. No greenish clouds, no burning eyes, just a subtle sweetness like hay rotting in autumn rain. British sentries sniffed the air, shrugged, and continued their watch. 6 hours later, Private William Collins doubled over, pink foam bubbling from his lips. The delayed horror multiplied. Men who'd breathed the invisible poison marched back to reserve trenches, ate their rations, wrote letters home. Then their lungs began drowning from within. Field surgeons watched helplessly as soldiers' faces turned grey-blue, their breathing reduced to shallow gasps. Phosgene killed 18 times more efficiently than chlorine. The crude cloth masks soaked in urine had failed too many men. By early 1916, British factories churned out thousands of small box respirators, rubberized canvas hoods sealed tight around the face, circular glass eyepieces fogging with each labored breath. Soldiers strapped the metal canister to their chests, its activated charcoal and lime permanganate crystals promising salvation from chlorine's yellow death. Training camps echoed with muffled shouts as men practiced donning masks in 9 seconds flat. Officers timed drills with stopwatches while sergeants bellowed through their own respirators, spraying water to simulate gas. The mask transformed soldiers into insectoid creatures, bulging eyes, protruding snouts, humanity erased. Each man carried spare filters, anti-dimming paste for the lenses, and the constant weight of readiness. German chemists hunched over laboratory benches, testing compounds that could penetrate British filters. Fritz Haber's team mixed dichloroethyl sulfide with precision, noting how the oily liquid clung to fabric, seeped through leather. They knew the Allies' charcoal couldn't stop everything. By spring's end, artillery shells filled with this new poison waited in ammunition dumps, ready to render every respirator obsolete. The small box respirator had become a soldier's second skin by 1917, its charcoal filter defeating both chlorine and phosgene. On July 12th, near Passchendaele, German artillery crews loaded shells marked with yellow crosses into their howitzers. Inside each shell sloshed an oily liquid that would render every Allied gas mask useless. The bombardment began at dawn. Unlike the hissing gas cylinders of 1915, these shells burst with muffled thuds, splashing their contents across dugouts and trenches. British soldiers smelled garlic, faint but distinct. Hours passed. Then Private William Collins felt his eyes burn like acid had been poured into them. By nightfall, entire battalions writhed in agony. The oil had soaked through uniforms, seeping into skin. Blisters erupted across backs, armpits, groins, anywhere fabric touched flesh. Men tore at their clothes, revealing raw, weeping burns. The contaminated soil itself became poison, burning anyone who touched it for days afterward. The mustard gas casualties from Ypres arrive at clearing stations in waves, their uniforms still reeking of garlic. Canvas tents stretch across muddy fields behind the lines, each one crammed with iron beds. Nurses wade through rows of writhing men, their white aprons already stained yellow from the chemical burns seeping through bandages. Dr. Harvey Cushing records the horror in his journal. Eyes swollen shut like overripe plums, skin peeling away in sheets. Standard treatments fail. Saline irrigation only spreads the oily poison deeper into tissue. Morphine barely touches the pain. Men claw at their bandages, desperate to scratch the chemical fire burning beneath their skin. By dawn, the overflow spills into nearby churches and barns. Medics experiment frantically, sodium bicarbonate baths, bleach powder, anything to neutralize the persistent agent. But for every man they save, 3 more arrive. The death rattle of fluid-filled lungs echoes through makeshift wards as nurses hold mirrors to check for breath. The mustard-soaked mud of Passchendaele still reeked when American doughboys arrived in 1918, their fresh gas masks gleaming against weathered British respirators. Wind patterns now dictated battle plans more than artillery barrages. Commanders studied meteorological reports, calculating when their own gas might blow back, transforming attack into suicide. The chemical genie refused to return to its bottle. Parliament erupted when photographs surfaced. Rows of blinded men, hands on shoulders, shuffling through field hospitals like medieval penitents. Newspapers printed testimonies of nurses scrubbing mustard gas from screaming soldiers' skin. Church leaders denounced the devil's breath. Even hardened generals recoiled at casualty reports. Gas wounded 10 men for every one it killed, overwhelming medical cause. Diplomats gathered in hushed chambers, drafting protocols while abandoned gas shells corroded in Belgian fields. The 1925 Geneva Protocol emerged from this revulsion, bearing signatures of nations who'd unleashed chlorine clouds just years before. Yet beneath peace treaties, military laboratories quietly archived their formulas. Knowledge too terrible to use, too dangerous to forget. The armistice signatures dried on paper, but in veterans' hospitals across Europe, men still fought for every breath. Harry Thompson, gassed at Passchendaele in 1917, wheezed through another sleepless night in Birmingham's military ward, his lungs crackling like wet paper. Mustard gas had scorched his airways 3 years prior, now pneumonia stalked him each winter. By 1925, French physician André Meyer documented 60,000 gas casualties still receiving treatment, their medical files thick with X-rays showing honeycomb lungs and chronic bronchitis. Men who'd survived chlorine clouds at Ypres developed emphysema by 40. Phosgene victims suffered heart failure. Veterans' widows described husbands waking in terror, clawing at phantom gas masks. These broken men became living testimony at Geneva in 1925, where diplomats drafted the protocol prohibiting chemical weapons. Harry Thompson died in 1938, his death certificate listing respiratory failure, 21 years after that yellow cloud engulfed his trench. His son would fight Hitler wearing a gas mask that never faced its intended horror.